Okay, so if you've been keeping track of the tech debates lately, you'll know the mood around artificial intelligence has, well, it's really shifted. It's gone from excitement to, frankly, alarm in many circles. We're hearing this increasingly loud call, almost a demand, that we need to destroy AI, just unplug it all, for the sake of humanity. Now, our sources for this deep dive have a really strong take on that. They actually called this position a, quote, moral panic masquerading as strategic caution. That's quite a charge. So our mission today is to really unpack the argument they're making, a philosophical and strategic case that says this fear is, well, misplaced, that it ignores history, and that pulling the plug now, that would be, and this is their phrase, strategically suicidal. So let's get into that core idea.
Right. And the central thesis is pretty striking. It suggests AI isn't actually causing our institutions to feel fragile or our culture to drift. Instead, it's acting like a mirror, a really powerful mirror reflecting the dysfunctions, the lack of real depth, the messy values that are already baked into our system. So if the AI looks dangerous or shallow, the argument is that's because the organizations building and deploying it are already operating that way. So the focus really shouldn't be destruction. It needs to be stewardship. Activity.
Stewardship versus destruction. Okay. And that phrase, strategically suicidal, that really lands hard. Why is this fear, this focus on the tool itself so intense right now? And why bring up history?
Well, because this isn't new territory. We've reacted like this before. This panic, it has echoes, right? The sources point straight to the printing press. Remember how that threatened the church's control over information? Or the steam engine, which completely upended labor and society. We tend to confuse the tool, the technology, with the system it operates within. The real danger isn't AI's potential intelligence. It's the quality, or lack thereof, of the systems governing how we use it.
Ah, okay. So if our current systems, our companies, our culture, if they're already set up to reward, say, flashy appearances over solid work spectacle, over substance, then AI just cranks that up to 11.
Precisely. If we're already suppressing individual initiative, if we're de-skilling people with rigid, brittle processes, AI will just accelerate the breakdown of those weak systems. But, and this is really the crux of their argument, if we consciously redesign those systems, if we build them to actually reward depth, resilience, complex thinking, then AI changes instantly. It becomes what they call a scaffold for cognitive resilience.
A scaffold for cognitive resilience. I like that. It flips the script. AI doesn't make us dumber. It could potentially make us smarter if we build the right environment around it. So this rebuttal seems to promise that AI can unlock something called latent cognition. That sounds pretty academic. What does that actually mean in practice? What are they saying AI can do for us?
They're basically promising a kind of reawakening, a way to push back against this drift toward shallowness we've seen. The idea is that AI can help reverse some of the economic de-skilling that's happened and crucially restore the signal-to-noise ratio in our culture.
Yeah.
You know, have real expertise, real value, cut through all the chatter. And to illustrate how we might mess this up, how we might fail to activate this potential, the sources use this really powerful historical analogy. It's one that anyone in engineering or design will likely recognize.
Okay, interesting. So we're stepping away from AI for a moment. Back to the 1980s, you said. Parametric CAD, computer-aided design, right? I remember the buzz. It was supposed to be revolutionary. Embed engineering logic right into the design, create these intelligent models that update automatically if you change something. So why is this the cautionary tale?
Because it's almost the perfect case study of a really sound, powerful tool basically failing because the ecosystem around it just wasn't ready. The vision was incredible. But the reality, instant overwhelming complexity. Look, modeling a simple block, a brick, is easy. But the second you add rules constraints, like this hole must always be centered or this surface must be tangent to that one, the model explodes into this incredibly complex web of dependencies. Parametric CAD basically hit the wall of human working memory hard. Designing this way, it forces you to think like a programmer, a mathematician, and a systems architect all at once. And the sources are clear. The cognitive load was just too high for most people and most teams back then. The models they built were fragile. They'd break in unexpected ways, often silently, when some dependency shifted. So what happened? Teams lost trust. They ended up abandoning the parametric features, going back to manual, static drawings, or constantly rebuilding models from scratch. The promise just fizzled out in practice.
Wow, so the tool itself was sound, maybe even ahead of its time, but the human systems couldn't keep up. The sources pinpoint 3 specific failures in that ecosystem, right? 3 reasons the potential wasn't realized. Yeah, first, you mentioned talent. They were trying to use draftsmen trained in old school static geometry for this new complex hybrid role, part designer, part logician, part systems thinker, wrong skill set. Second was training. Education just hadn't caught up. People developed bad habits like over-constraining models until they were rigid or under-constraining them so they were unpredictable, brittle practices as they call it. And third, strategic alignment. This is key. Management was still measuring success by speed, how fast can you get the drawing out, not by the long-term value, the resilience, the reusability that parametric CAD was designed for. They essentially forced the powerful tool to fit their old, shallower habits.
And that is the direct line back to AI. If CAD revealed a level of complexity that humans struggled to manage back then, well, AI is precisely the tool that can finally handle that complexity. Think about it. AI can track hundreds, even thousands of those dependencies. It can suggest robust ways to define constraints. It could automate related complex tasks like mesh generation for engineering simulations, things that used to take years of specialized experience to get right. So AI doesn't replace the expert. It elevates them. It frees them up to focus on the high-level strategy, the design intent, instead of getting bogged down fighting the software or managing this massive cognitive load, destroying AI now. From this perspective, it looks like cutting the very lifeline that could finally deliver the kind of resilient, intelligent systems that CAD promised but couldn't quite achieve on its own.
Which brings us right back to the core of this rebuttal. The argument that the real crisis isn't runaway technology. It's us. It's human complacency, the steady erosion of deep expertise.
Absolutely. That's the real danger they see, this collective slide towards shallowness. And you see evidence of it everywhere. Systemic de-skilling. Think about mid-level professionals. They're often displaced not because AI is suddenly smarter, but because the organizations they work for have, and this is a quote, ceased to value depth. And look at the broader economy. Over 80% is now the service sector. And what does that sector often reward? Compliance, repetition, not necessarily deep creativity or strategic resilience.
And culturally, too, there's been this inversion, hasn't there? The shift where institutions seem to prioritize spectacle over signal, getting noticed, being visible, hitting quick metrics that seems to trump real mastery, slow burn legacy work, deep, hard-won expertise. Though I guess I should play devil's advocate for a second. I mean, in a world drowning in information, isn't some level of spectacle, being visible, being engaging kind of necessary just to get your signal heard at all? Is the damage really that clear-cut?
That's a fair point, and the sources do acknowledge visibility has a role. But the argument is about the inversion of priority. The systems, the incentives, are increasingly designed to actively suppress deep thinking. Why? Because deep thinking is slow, it's expensive, it doesn't always produce immediately visible results, and there's even sort of evolutionary angle to this they bring up. Historically, biologically, survival often favored conserving energy metabolic efficiency. Our brains are incredibly powerful, running on about 20 watts, but they allocate that energy based on their architecture, their wiring, not necessarily conscious effort. So the sources argue we're often lackluster, maybe even shallow, by design. Not because we lack the capacity, but because our latent cognition, that deep strategic thinking ability, is often suppressed by modern systems that are optimized for quick compliance, for easily measured outputs. And this is where AI comes back in. It can act as that cognitive exoskeleton. Think of it like a mental power suit. It helps us handle that intense complexity, the kind CAD exposed, without the crushing cognitive fatigue. It lets us finally activate that dormant potential we've let atrophy.
Okay, a cognitive exoskeleton. So the answer isn't taking off the power suit, it's redesigning the world around it so we can actually use it effectively. If we need to rebuild the system strategically, what does that look like? The sources propose these conceptual tools, these cognitive instruments, right, to help guide that shift.
Exactly. They offer a language, a set of frameworks to help us start re-architecting our workplaces, our institutions. Let's touch on a couple. The first one is latent cognition versus systemic inertia. This instrument, it helps you diagnose situations where you see brilliance, real talent, but it's dormant. Why? Because the environment, the system itself, is actively misaligned with it. It's basically a call to rethink workflows, not to just accept routine, but to actively try and activate the talent you already have.
Right. So instead of just saying this team isn't performing, you'd use this to ask, is our system preventing them from performing? Are we failing to activate their potential? That shifts the focus. Okay, what's the second one?
The second is signal versus spectacle. We touched on this. It's essentially a sorting mechanism, a lens to force ourselves, our organizations, to distinguish between work that builds real, lasting value legacy and work that just generates noise, buzz, stuff that dissipates in the churn, as they put it. It's about consciously prioritizing difficult, meaningful value over just immediate visibility or, getting likes.
Got it. Diagnosis and value sorting. But what about the pace? Deep work Legacy work, it takes time, and modern organizations aren't exactly known for patience.
Precisely. And that's where the next two motifs are helpful. The third is legacy versus latency. This one tackles pace head-on. It reframes things like low initial engagement or maybe a slower delivery timeline, not as failures, but potentially as features of deep, meaningful work. It provides justification for strategic delay, for rewarding endurance over just churning things out quickly. It's a reminder that true legacy is built in layers. It's not instantaneous. And finally, number 4 brings us right back to that CAD story. Tool versus talent. This reframes technology failures. Instead of blaming the software, it forces you to look at the surrounding ecosystem. Is the failure really the tool? Or is it a failure in how we source talent, built the cognitive infrastructure, or cultivated the right mindset? It puts the focus back on the human element, the hands and minds using the tool.
Okay, so these four motifs, latent cognition versus systemic inertia, signal versus spectacle, legacy versus latency, and tool versus talent, they all seem to weave together into one big conclusion, which is the answer isn't tearing down the tech. It's about building better architecture around it. Specifically, what the sources call legacy architecture systems designed to last, designed to encode important values like modularity, precision, maybe even ethical guardrails, right into the tech itself.
Exactly. Pulling the plug on AI now. It's framed as an abdication of responsibility. It doesn't halt the progress of AI globally. It just ensures that its future development gets pushed towards actors who might have less strategic foresight or perhaps fewer ethical concerns. The real way to safeguard civilization, according to this view, is through thoughtful, robust, enduring architecture. Not through fear-driven prohibition. AI, if we steward it properly, isn't the enemy. It's the potential lifeline. It's the companion our own ingenuity has been waiting for to tackle the complexity we've created.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought to chew on directly from this material. If civilization isn't preserved by fear, but by deliberate design, and if AI isn't the monster under the bed, but potentially this crucial lifeline, this cognitive power suit we need, then what specific steps can you take right now in your own work, your own organization, your own thinking? How do you start shifting the focus, the metrics, the rewards, away from just spectacle and towards genuine signal? The choice, as these sources really hammer home, is activation over abandonment.